Big thank you to Greg Ip, to Dr. Jared Bernstein, Kristen Soltis-Anderson, Crystal Ball, and Dr. Doug Holtz-Eakin for a fascinating discussion. So one more round of applause. Speaking of a generational conversation, we're next lucky to be joined by Congressman Joaquin Castro from my adopted hometown of San Antonio, Texas. Congressman Castro, watch him, especially now with the big shakeup we're seeing in House leadership. I think you're going to see Congressman Castro accelerate up through the ranks of the House Democratic Caucus. He's already a leading voice on intelligence, national security, foreign affairs issue. He's a remarkably attractive man, and he's a brilliant voice in the Democratic Party, and we're going to welcome him and, of course, our good friend Steve Clemons on stage for a quick conversation. We're going to transition right from Congressman Castro into three great speakers, Senators Manchin, Booker, and Scott, so everyone keep your seats for that as well. So a big round of applause for Congressman Castro and Steve Clemons.
Thank you, Steve. Congressman Castro, welcome to my office. Please feel free to lie down, enjoy. How do you really feel about your brother?
My brother, I love my brother.
Yeah? You once told me, though, you were cuter.
I believe that,
yeah. So there
he
you go.
believes the reverse.
But we've got a few minutes. So first, it's a crazy day of votes. I want to say thank you so much for coming here. So let's get right to it. When it comes to what Crystal Ball just said up here, that she doesn't believe the Democratic Party has answers in these clear areas, and that the one who has answers, as gross as they may be to many folks, nonetheless has been the president. What is your response to her?
A few things. Actually, I agree with her assessment that Donald Trump, a lot of what he did was turn Americans against each other. He basically divided people and then conquered, in other words, won the election. And you know, politics, a lot of politics is getting people to see life through a certain lens. So when we make arguments about the economy, or folks make arguments on an issue about pro-life or pro-choice or education or so forth, you're trying to get voters to see the value and see really life through that lens, or politics through that lens, because these issues are important. And for Donald Trump, in many ways, he got many folks to focus through a racial lens, and that divided people. And it has been very powerful for him. And so I think her point is well taken. How do you overcome that? Because we are, you know, in a nation where the original sin was racism. And so to answer basically the question, what does the Democratic Party offer? The Democratic Party has to be the party of opportunity for everybody. In 2020, we're going to see a wonderful group of people from different parts of the country, the coastal states, the Midwest, I think the South, as Democrats who are going to stand and run for president. We have to run as the party of opportunity for all Americans who are going to help unite the country rather than divide the country the way the president has.
I'm going to shorthand some things that probably shouldn't be blurred together, but in our time I want to do it. I mean, you've been at the border, the issue of what the administration has been trying to do to send a signal to people, don't come here, don't seek asylum, but that's blurred in with the question of immigrant labor, and it's blurred in with the question of immigration writ large, and that's blurred into DACA and the kind of broad arena. And I have a friend named Mike Elk who said, I'm not coming to this conference today because we didn't have an advocate for migrant labor rights. So I'm just interested, and I told him he's wrong because I'm going to ask you about this. But you know, I think that the broad question is it unpatriotic to basically advocate for a healthy immigrant system and dealing with, I mean, how do you square that? Because some people look at what you've been doing as unpatriotic, as it's not true to the citizens you represent.
Yeah, I don't believe that it's unpatriotic to make sure that we always respect people as human beings. Just because somebody crosses a border or presents themselves for asylum at the border of a nation doesn't make them non-human. And on the other side of that, I believe that people that are arguing, conservatives that are arguing for stronger border security measures, I don't believe that's unpatriotic either. There are legitimate disagreements on policy. Right. But I think when we get to a point as a nation where the United Nations, for which the United States is the host and the largest funder, condemns the United States for separating young children from their mothers, I think we've gotten to a very dark place, and this administration has gotten to a dark place. I was down at the border a few weeks ago at 2 of the shelters, including one of them that's a tender age shelter that has kids, as they said, from the ages of 0 to 12. And along with other members of Congress, I held an 8-month-old named Roger and a 1-year-old named Leah. And the 8-month-old, they said that he had come over to the country with his sister because his mom had died. And this is a child that we're expecting to go to court and literally represent himself alone. These kids have no representation at all in our legal system. So many of us believe that as the nation that is the wealthiest nation on earth, the most powerful nation on earth, and also we believe the most humane nation on earth, that we should do better than that.
Joaquin, I know you have a new foreign policy podcast. You're one of these cool people who can think on foreign policy on one side of your brain and economics on the other, which I think is great. I am interested in how you would frame the American brand in the world today. How does it look? What are your concerns? What are the impacts of that?
I still believe that the United States is and should be a leader among nations of the world. The United States has been a beacon, I think, of humanity, of morality in many ways, a beacon for unity and peace. I do think that it's clear that if you look at what's going on, there is a real shakeup in many of the multilateral institutions that I believe have helped keep the world safe. The president is over in Europe this week. They're in the NATO summit. He's got a meeting with Theresa May after that, and then a meeting with Vladimir Putin. The president today said that basically Germany is captive to Russia, has challenged the value of NATO. Also, of course, the value of things like NAFTA and our trade agreements, multilateral trade agreements. So I think one of the reasons I started this podcast, number one, is because there was nothing like that in Congress right now. There are a few folks, I think, including Senator Booker, who have podcasts on mostly domestic issues. But there was nobody that was really talking about foreign policy from the halls of Congress. And so, we're talking about everything. We're talking about the North Korea issue and denuclearization and the prospects for that. Talking about Russia and cybersecurity because they've become so aggressive with basically troll factories that help interfere in the politics of other countries. I'm interviewing today the head of OAS, Organization of American States, on many of the issues in Latin America, in Nicaragua and Ecuador, and of course in the Northern Triangle countries of Central America. So, I still believe that the American brand is strong, but that said, Steve, that can be undone. The way I put it is, 50 years ago, if you asked somebody that was living in Africa or Latin America or Asia or anywhere around the world, 50 years ago, my mom had just graduated from high school and was in college. For all of the work that we still had to do in terms of civil rights and women's rights and voting rights, 50 years ago, if you asked somebody where they would want to go if they were going to leave their home country, the answer 50 years ago was very clearly the United States of America. I think the challenge for all of us is to make sure that 50 years from now, the answer is still the United States of America.
I just want to ask permission. Diana, can I quote you in your comment? Okay. Everyone, this is Diana Negroponte. She's really cool. She's a scholar at the Wilson Center, and we're not, so I'm going to I told her we're going to have questions, but short time. She's actually really interesting. She's got a cool accent, but beyond that, she made a stark comment that I hadn't thought about, and it's been hanging with me since she said it. She said, the world is watching the kind of pugnaciousness and self-absorption and a kind of populist illiberalism. I mean, I'm putting words in her mouth, but a populist behavior, a populist gruffness, and that Mexico just elected a leader that is out of that ilk. That the new president of Mexico, whom we all don't know yet, but nonetheless bears a lot of similar markings of populism, whatever they're trying, that they're watching and they're mimicking. And I hadn't thought about that, and it's been haunting me. Do you worry about that at all as you watch Mexico from your close vantage point?
Yeah, absolutely. And I worry
Is that fair,
mostly.
Diana?
That's it?
Okay,
All right.
good, great.
Yeah, I mean, I worry that other nations will start electing leaders in reaction to the way they perceive our president. And if the populations in those countries perceive our leadership and our president as too hostile to their countries, that their leaders and candidates use that as a foil in their own elections and are successful then, because the way they win is by bashing the United States. And to the extent that that happens more and more in our own backyard, so to speak, in the Western Hemisphere, that becomes a real problem for us. It becomes a real challenge to work on economic issues. And Mexico is, for Texas, the largest trading partner, for example, but also to work on counter narcotics and so many other issues together. So yeah, it concerns me a lot.
You know, you also have a lot of companies in your district, and I asked a bunch of hedge fund managers and sort of titans of industry recently that were up a panel in New York, did they see Washington as friend or foe? And every single one of them, Democrat or Republican, said they saw Washington as friend, largely because of the tax bill and the decrease of the tax rate. So my question to you is, how do you see the economic scene? Are there things that Donald Trump is getting right?
That's a great question. A few things. I mentioned that Texas, of course, is the state that does the most trade of any state in the nation. Right. So you could imagine with the steel and aluminum tariffs, with the proposed auto tariffs, these things are making the Texas business community very, very nervous. Also the significant agricultural community in Texas. Look, there's no question that for some corporations, especially larger corporations, there has been a real benefit from the tax bill that was passed not too long ago. But by the same token, a lot of working class people and a lot of middle class people are not seeing much of a benefit. A lot of the benefit has gone either to massive stockholders, people that hold a lot of stock, or in terms of buybacks and other corporate things. So in my district, I represent a bread and butter district where people are mostly concerned about a job, about their health care, and about their kids' education. And so you ask the question, how has Donald Trump done for them? I don't think very well.
What would you do if you were President of the United States in reducing inequality?
Another great question. I will say this, because I've thought about that a lot. I mean, in addition to...
Which part, the president part?
No, not that part, no. I'm not running for president. The part about reducing inequality, in addition to the tax policies, for example, I think this tax bill that was passed increases inequality. But I ask the question, how do you do that in a non-governmental role? If you were gonna think about that, what responsibilities would corporations, private businesses, and others take on to reduce inequality in a non-governmental role? So for example, the Hispanic Caucus wrote a letter to many tech companies not too long ago asking for the numbers on diversity in their workforce. And you can imagine the numbers came back and they were very poor, almost across the board. And some of that can be attributed, I think, to discrimination. But I would argue that the lion's share of it is something that is common in many industries, and including in politics on Capitol Hill, which is that people tend to hire the people they know, or the people who are the friends of the people they know. I think that afflicts basically every industry out there. And somehow I think if we're really going to do a better job on these issues, the answer is not just a government answer, but it's an answer that goes beyond that in making sure that people in their own personal and private lives make an effort to go beyond just their circles. That's a tough thing you don't necessarily put that in a bill, and I think it's tougher than legislating, actually.
It's part of leadership.
But that's right. I think it's part of leadership, and it's part of what's going to take to finally start to close some of that inequality that we see in society.
You know, shortly we're going to have 3 U.S. senators up here, Joe Manchin, Tim Scott, and Cory Booker, and they all get to vote on Judge Kavanaugh. You're not a senator, so you don't get a vote on that. But if you were a senator, if you will be a senator, would you be seducible on Kavanaugh?
You know, I think that the Senate, the United States, if I was in the United States Senate, I would not vote to confirm Judge Kavanaugh.
No matter what?
I don't think that while this Russia investigation is underway, I'm part of the Intelligence Committee, I would not allow a vote on it until those findings are complete. And I believe Senator Booker has said the same thing. I would be in that camp.
They've just given us a little more time right after you mentioned Russia. So since you mentioned Russia, what do you know that we don't know?
A lot, Steve, a lot. I know a lot. No, listen,
what can you flirt with and tell us? I mean, I mean, I know how the game is played in Intel, and there are things you can share with us that give us direction without violating any secrecy laws. So just give us a flavor.
Well, first, it has been a fascinating time to serve. I came on in July of 2016, right in time, basically, for this investigation to get started. And some of these interviews, the shortest one I think was about 2 hours, the longest one was about 10 hours or more. I think I was one of the first people to say that I believe that there would be people in the spring of 2017. I said that based on everything I'd seen, I believe that there would be people who would end up going to jail because of everything that transpired. And that has now basically happened. And based on everything I've seen, I believe that there are going to be more people that will be indicted before this is all over.
More like what people whose names are household names or?
That's the part I can't say.
Yeah. You can't say. I mean, you don't have to say who.
Just give
Would
you
I know them?
You might. You know a lot of people. So.
You got to give me credit for trying, guys. I mean, I think it is interesting. But I do think that this kind of broad question, and let me just ask you to come back to crystal ball in a way when she was talking about the Democratic Party, because it has come up. We're here today to talk about the economy, and we've brought in people from a lot of different dimensions. We're talking about inequality, we're talking about tax, we're talking about trade, we're talking about automation. That if you kind of look in this room, my goal today, our goal, mine and Steve Clemons, John Lettieri's goal, Richard Vague's goal, is to break down the silos and create a broader conversation. Right. But I think part of it is also in the broader place of where America is in this. I had three ambassadors up here and a mock one who were pretty positive about Trump on trade, pretty positive about seeing a convergence of interests around dealing with China. So I was actually very interested in this and surprised. So as you kind of look at this, I'm interested in whether the Democratic Party is in a knee-jerk mode where it just doesn't like everything.
You mean where it's reacting to everything?
Yeah.
Right.
And what its agenda is. I mean, because when I listen to these, I had France, Canada, and Singapore up here, all of whom I thought were going to take a swipe at the White House, and they didn't do it for diplomatic reasons.
Well,
they were thoughtful.
They're diplomats.
I know, and they were diplomats. But they actually, they did outline some problems. But it does raise the issue of, do you just react to what's going on, and do you have a better agenda that you can put on the table? Yeah. So I ask you, where is that better agenda?
Yeah. No, I agree. Look, the Democratic Party can't just be a reactive party to the president. I think that you can perhaps do well in the midterms that way, because many midterms, not just this one, but historically, are a measure of how the president's doing. But certainly when you get ready for the 2020 presidential election, you can't just be a party that's reacting. And I actually do believe that the Democratic Party has a strong agenda going forward. And let me tell you a little bit of what I believe that it is. I said that I believe that we're the party of opportunity because I think this is a nation of opportunity. And I think that that is the one solid thing that this country has done better than any other country on earth. What I mean by that is, just as there's an infrastructure of roads and streets and highways that helps all Americans get to where they want to go on the road, if you think about it, in the United States, there is an infrastructure of opportunity that helps all of us get to where we want to go in life. So a lot of the things that you've been talking about here today, making sure that we have great schools and universities, a strong healthcare system, an economy that allows people to support themselves and their families, if you think about what that represents an infrastructure of opportunity in a country that allows people to go pursue their American dreams. And the United States has done that better than any nation on earth. And so that, to me, is what the Democratic Party stands for. That's what we're fighting for. And I hope that that's what we're going to talk about in 2018 and 2020.
So of the leading notables in the Democratic Party today, who do you think is best equipped to lead the party, given your criteria?
You talking about a speaker, a president, a majority leader? What do you think?
Just to frame the game.
I actually think
Cory Booker's coming up here in a minute.
Corey's
you like
great.
him?
I mean,
you're okay with him?
I like
How
a lot
about
of
Mitch
them.
Landrieu? Mitch Landrieu's coming up
Mitch is
later.
great.
Yeah. Who do you dislike?
My brother. No. No. I think there's a lot of folks that are carrying that message. Look, when it comes to 2020 especially, you don't want 50 people standing up on that stage competing for the nomination. But to some extent, the more the merrier. Because let everybody get up there and make their case to Democrats and to the American people, and may the strongest person win. Because it's going to take a very strong person for Democrats to beat Donald Trump in 2020.
Ladies and gentlemen, Joaquin Castro.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Appreciate it.